The scent of old wood and lavender was the first thing that truly made me feel at home. It was the smell of my new house, a scent that promised peace, a stark contrast to the sterile, recycled air of the high-rise office building I had just escaped. For 12 years, my life had been a relentless cascade of billable hours, depositions, and the gnawing anxiety of corporate litigation in the heart of Chicago. I was Clara Hayes, and I had been a very good lawyer. So good, in fact, that I had burned out with the intensity of a dying star, leaving behind a lucrative partnership for the quiet solitude of a small town and a house with a history. The house was a late 19th century farmhouse, the last of its kind in a sea of beige, modern conformity. It stood on a generous half-acre, a defiant island of character surrounded by the meticulously planned, architecturally homogeneous development of Crestwood Estates. The previous owners, the great-grandchildren of the original farmer, had sold off the surrounding 90 acres to the developer decades ago, but had stubbornly held on to the original homestead. It was this uniqueness, this sense of defiant history, that had called to me. The wraparound porch, the slightly crooked shutters, the ancient oak tree in the backyard. They were the antithesis of the cookie-cutter world I had just left. This was where I would finally read for pleasure, learn to bake bread, and reclaim the quiet, thoughtful person I had been before the law reshaped me. My illusion of a peaceful new chapter lasted less than a full day. I was on a stepladder, carefully painting the front door a cheerful, welcoming shade of sunflower yellow, when a clipped, authoritative voice sliced through the tranquil afternoon. "That color is not on the approved palette." I looked down. A woman stood on my walkway, arms crossed, her body held as rigidly as a telephone pole. She was probably in her late 50s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed, unnaturally blonde hair. Her attire was a coordinated ensemble of crisp white shorts, a pastel pink polo shirt, and a visor that seemed less for sun protection and more for effect. A clipboard was clutched in her hand like a scepter. "I'm sorry," I said, lowering my paintbrush. My mind, still conditioned by years of legal practice, immediately began a silent assessment. Subject appears hostile. Stance is confrontational. Opening statement is an accusation, not a greeting. The approved color palette for exterior doors is limited to heritage white, colonial blue, and forest brown, she stated, as though reciting scripture. That garish yellow is a clear violation of Section 8, subsection B, of the Crestwood Estates covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I descended the ladder, wiping my hands on a rag. I offered a smile, my first attempt at being a friendly, non-confrontational neighbor. "Hi, I'm Clara Hayes. I just moved in." She did not return the smile. Her eyes, small and sharp, scanned my property with visible disapproval, lingering on the slightly overgrown lavender bushes. "I am Brenda Miller, president of the Crestwood Homeowners Association, and I am aware you just moved in, which is why I am giving you the courtesy of a verbal warning. You have 48 hours to repaint the door to an approved color, or you will receive a written citation and a $50 fine." I blinked, taken aback by the sheer velocity of her aggression. "Brenda, it's nice to meet you. I think there might be a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," she cut me off. "The rules are the rules. They are what protect our property values and maintain the aesthetic integrity of our community. We do not make exceptions." She had an air of absolute certainty, the kind of unshakable self-righteousness I'd only ever seen in opposing counsel, who were about to have their entire case dismantled by a surprise piece of evidence. For a brief moment, I was tempted to engage, to pull out the thick file from my pre-purchase due diligence and explain the legal reality of the situation. But the old Clara, the lawyer, was supposed to be retired. The new Clara, the baker of bread and reader of novels, wanted to give peace a chance. "Well, thank you for letting me know," I said, my voice intentionally mild. "I appreciate you stopping by to introduce yourself." My non-committal response seemed to displease her even more than an argument would have. A muscle in her jaw tightened. 48 hours. Miss Hayes. Welcome to Crestwood. She pivoted on her pristine white tennis shoe and marched back toward the sidewalk, her back ramrod straight. I watched her go, a pink and white harbinger of suburban strife. I looked at my half-painted, gloriously yellow door, a beacon of my newfound freedom and individuality. Then I looked out at the rows of identical houses with their identical doors, all painted in dull, approved shades. A sigh escaped my lips. I had left the courtroom behind, but it seemed I had inadvertently moved onto a new kind of battlefield. Brenda Miller had fired the first shot in a war I didn't want to fight. But my gut, honed by years of conflict, told me this was only the beginning. She had no idea who I was, and more importantly, she had no idea where her authority ended and my property began. The first official notice arrived a week later, delivered by a sullen-looking teenager in a golf cart bearing the Crestwood Estates logo. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope with the HOA's embossed seal. Inside, a formal letter detailed my transgressions. The sunflower yellow door, which I had finished painting with a deep sense of satisfaction, was cited as violation #1, carrying a fine of $50. A new charge had been added, violation #2 unapproved landscaping, which referred to the small vegetable patch I had started tilling in my side yard, an area clearly visible from the street. This infraction came with a hefty $100 fine. The letter, signed with a flourish by Brenda Miller, stated that failure to pay within 30 days and remediate the violations would result in escalating monthly penalties. I sat at my antique dining table, the letter spread before me, and felt a familiar, cold fire ignite in my belly. It was the same feeling I used to get when reading a deliberately misleading brief from an opposing law firm. It was a feeling of righteous indignation mixed with the thrill of a challenge. I had hoped to leave this part of myself behind, but Brenda was actively coaxing the dormant lawyer out of retirement. My first instinct was to draft a scathing, 10-page legal repudiation, complete with citations from property law and a demand for a formal retraction. But that would be an escalation. The new, peaceful Clara opted for a more measured approach. I would begin by building a clear, irrefutable paper trail. I wrote a simple, polite letter. In it, I did not argue or accuse. I simply stated a fact. Dear Miss Miller and the Crestwood HOA Board. It began. Thank you for your correspondence of date. Please be advised that the property located at 1512 Old Farm Road, legally described in the county records as Parcel 7B, Map 12 is not and has never been subject to the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the Crestwood Estates subdivision. As such, the property is not within the jurisdiction of the Homeowners Association. No fines are owed, and no remediation is required. Sincerely, Clara Hayes. I chose my words with surgical precision. By citing the legal description of the property, I was signaling that I was aware of its specific, unique status. By using phrases like "not within the jurisdiction," I was establishing the legal foundation of my position. I sent the letter via certified mail, with a return receipt requested. The green slip, signed by Brenda Miller herself, came back a few days later. I filed it away in a new accordion folder I labeled Miller. B. For 2 weeks, there was silence. I began to hope, foolishly, that my polite, factual letter had resolved the matter. Perhaps she had consulted the HOA's governing documents, checked the county plat map, and realized her error. I tended to my tomatoes and zucchini, enjoyed my bright yellow door, and started to breathe a little easier. Then, the second letter arrived. This one was far more aggressive in tone. Your refusal to acknowledge the authority of the Crestwood HOA is noted. Brenda wrote, however, your property is geographically located within our community, and you benefit from the services and amenities provided, including landscaping of common areas and the security patrol. Your previous fines of $150 are now past due and have accrued a late fee of $50. Furthermore, a new violation has been observed: the placement of a wind chime on your front porch, a violation of Section 9. See regarding exterior noise-making devices. A fine of $75 is hereby levied. Your new total is $275. Please remit payment immediately. She had completely ignored my legal position. This was no longer a mistake. It was a willful act of aggression. She was attempting to bully me into submission, assuming I was just another resident who would eventually capitulate under the weight of mounting fines and bureaucratic intimidation. This time, my response was firmer. I drafted a formal cease and desist letter. This was a document I had written hundreds of times in my career, a legal instrument designed to warn a party to stop an unlawful activity or face legal action. This letter serves as a formal demand that you, Brenda Miller, and the Crestwood HOA immediately cease and desist all unlawful harassment and attempts to extort funds from me. I wrote, as stated previously, the property at 1512 Old Farm Road is not encumbered by your association's covenants. Your continued demands for payment constitute harassment. Any further correspondence of this nature will be forwarded to my legal counsel. Furthermore, any attempt to place a lien on my property or interfere with its quiet enjoyment will be met with swift and significant legal action, seeking both compensatory and punitive damages. Govern yourselves accordingly. The phrase "govern yourselves accordingly" was a piece of legal jargon I'd always enjoyed, a polite, professional way of saying, "Don't mess with me." I again sent the letter via certified mail. I was building a clear record of her escalating harassment and my repeated formal attempts to resolve the issue peacefully. In any future legal proceeding, this documentation would be invaluable. It would paint her not as a misinformed administrator, but as a malicious actor who knowingly ignored lawful warnings. She thought she was building a case of bylaw violations against me. In reality, I was building a case of harassment against her, one certified letter at a time. Brenda's response to my cease and desist letter was not another piece of mail. It was a silent, insidious act of destruction that marked a significant escalation in our one-sided war. I came out one morning with a cup of coffee, intending to enjoy the sunrise from my porch, and was greeted by a familiar, acrid smell, the chemical tang of a powerful herbicide. I followed the scent to my fledgling vegetable garden. The sight made my stomach clench. The broad, healthy leaves of my tomato plants, which had just started to show their first yellow blossoms, were wilted and curling at the edges, mottled with ugly brown spots. My zucchini and squash plants were similarly afflicted, their vibrant green turning to a sickly yellow-brown. The damage was concentrated in a neat line, almost as if it had been sprayed by someone walking along the edge of my property, someone who knew exactly where to inflict the most visible, soul-crushing damage. There was no note, no witness, no direct proof. It was a classic act of deniable aggression. But I knew, with a certainty that settled in my bones like a winter chill. Who was responsible? This was Brenda's answer to my legal warnings. If she couldn't intimidate me with paper, she would resort to poison. She had moved from bureaucratic harassment to active property damage. The act was more than just vandalism. It was personal. That little garden was a symbol of my new life. It was my connection to the earth, my attempt to grow something real and tangible after years of cultivating nothing but abstract legal arguments. To see it poisoned felt like a direct assault on my dream of a peaceful existence. The old Clara, the litigator, would have immediately started thinking about proving culpability in court. How could I link the herbicide to Brenda? Could I get a sample and have it tested? Could I find a local store that sold that specific brand and check their security footage? The thoughts came automatically, a cascade of strategic legal thinking. But I forced them down. A lawsuit for a few dead vegetable plants was impractical and would be incredibly difficult to prove. Instead, I channeled my anger into a more productive and ultimately more powerful solution. That afternoon, I drove to a high-end security store in a neighboring city, a place that supplied equipment to businesses and government contractors, not homeowners. I spent over $2,000 on a state-of-the-art, closed-circuit surveillance system. I bought 4K resolution cameras with infrared night vision and wide dynamic range, a networked video recorder with a massive hard drive, and hundreds of feet of shielded, direct burial Ethernet cable. For the next 3 days, I became a technician. I ran cables through my attic and buried them in discreet trenches around my property. I mounted the cameras under the eaves of the house, positioning them to create overlapping fields of view that covered every square inch of my land, as well as the street and sidewalk in front of it. This was not a consumer-grade Wi-Fi system that could be easily disabled or hacked. This was a professional security installation. As I configured the system on my laptop, I found myself slipping back into old patterns of thought. But this time, they were focused on evidence, not just intelligence. My internal monologue was a checklist of legal and technical requirements. System needs to be a closed loop to prevent any claims of digital tampering. All recordings must have a non-editable, system-generated timestamp and watermark. Set the motion detection sensitivity to capture anything larger than a squirrel, and configure push alerts to a dedicated, encrypted messaging app on my phone. The NVR storage must be configured to retain footage for at least 180 days to establish a long-term pattern of behavior. I'm not just creating a security system. I'm creating a legally admissible archive of every event that happens on and around this property. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction as I finished the installation. The cameras were my silent, unblinking sentinels. They were my witnesses. Brenda would undoubtedly notice them. She would see them not just as a security measure, but as a direct challenge to her authority and her ability to operate in the shadows. I knew it would infuriate her, and I knew she would be unable to resist escalating further. Let her, I thought, as I aimed the final camera to cover my newly barren vegetable patch. Let her try something else. She thought she was operating under the cover of darkness, with the shield of plausible deniability. She didn't realize that I had just turned my entire property into a high-definition movie set, and she was about to become the star of her own downfall. Every move she made from now on would be captured, cataloged, and preserved. The game had changed. I was no longer just collecting paper evidence. I was collecting proof. The installation of the security cameras had the predictable effect of shifting Brenda's tactics. Direct attacks on my property were now too risky, even for her. She was a bully, and bullies thrive on the perception of power and the absence of witnesses. My cameras were 4 silent, unblinking witnesses that never slept. So, She pivoted her assault to a different front, one where evidence was subjective and truth was easily manipulated, the court of public opinion. Held on the digital stage of the Crestwood Neighbors private Facebook group. The group, which I had joined in my first week with the naive hope of meeting my new neighbors, was a seemingly benign online space. It was filled with pictures of backyard barbecues, recommendations for plumbers, and announcements for the annual community bake sale. But beneath the surface, it was Brenda's personal fiefdom. As the sole administrator, she wielded absolute control over the narrative, shaping the perceptions of over 200 households with the click of a mouse. Her first post was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive insinuation. It appeared on a Tuesday evening, perfectly timed for when most people would be scrolling through their phones after dinner. It was a long, rambling community reminder about the importance of being a team player. "Hello, Crestwood," it began, accompanied by a cheerful stock photo of a smiling family. "Just a little note on what makes our community so special. It's our shared values and our commitment to working together. We all pay our dues and follow the rules because we know it protects our collective investment. Unfortunately, it's come to the board's attention that some individuals believe they are an exception. They want to enjoy the benefits of our beautifully maintained common areas, our safe streets, and our high property values without contributing their fair share. This kind of selfish, freeloader mentality hurts everyone. Let's all remember to be good neighbors, and that we're all in this together." She never mentioned my name. She didn't have to. I was the only property in Crestwood Estates that was not. In fact, in Crestwood Estates, I was the only one not paying dues. The post was a targeted strike, meticulously crafted to paint me as a moocher, a parasite, leeching off the hard work of her neighbors. The comment section exploded almost immediately, a chorus of digital sycophants rushing to her defense. "So true. Brenda, thank you for all you do. Some people have no shame. Who are they talking about?" one person asked, to which another replied, "I think it's that old farmhouse, the one with the ugly yellow door." I watched my reputation being systematically dismantled in real time. I, who had paid a premium for my unique property and asked for nothing from the HOA, was being branded as a freeloader. The irony was galling. A few days later, a second post appeared, this time from one of Brenda's loyal lieutenants. It was a photo of my house, taken from across the street, with a red circle drawn crudely around the new security cameras under the eaves. "Does anyone else find this unsettling?" the caption read. "Feeling like we're being watched in our own neighborhood? We never had things like this before. It feels very aggressive. What are they so afraid of? Or what are they trying to hide?" The narrative was being skillfully twisted. My defensive measure against her vandalism was being reframed as an act of aggression against the community. I was no longer just a freeloader. I was now a paranoid and potentially dangerous outsider. The effects were immediate and palpable. The few tentative waves I'd received from neighbors on my morning walks ceased. People who had once smiled now averted their gaze, suddenly fascinated by a crack in the sidewalk. When I went to the community mailbox, conversations would halt mid-sentence. I was being socially quarantined, isolated by a deliberate campaign of slander and misinformation. One evening, my phone rang. It was an old number I hadn't seen in years, belonging to my former law partner and mentor, Ben Carter. "Clara," his deep, familiar voice boomed. "I was just talking to Mark in real estate litigation, and your name came up. He mentioned you bought some historic holdout property in the middle of a new development. Sounds like a textbook case for a covenant dispute. You're not getting yourself into trouble, are you?" I laughed. A tired, humorless sound. You could say that. Ben. I seem to have found myself in a cold war with the local HOA president. I gave him a brief, clinical rundown of the situation, the jurisdictional overreach, the baseless fines, the property damage, and the ongoing social media smear campaign. I told him about the file I was building, the certified letters, the video evidence. He was silent for a long moment when I finished. Then he let out a low whistle. Good Lord. Clara, you've got a textbook harassment suit on your hands. This woman is a menace. You're building a perfect case. The evidence of her ignoring your formal notices of jurisdiction is the linchpin. It proves intent. This isn't negligence. It's malice. I know, I said, looking at the growing file on my desk. But I came here for peace. Ben, not another lawsuit. Sometimes, he said, his voice turning serious. The only way to get peace is to fight for it. This Brenda sounds like the type who will only escalate until she hits a wall of consequences so hard it shatters her. You know the drill. Document everything. Let her dig her own grave. And when you're ready to file, you call me. We'll do it pro bono, just for the sheer, unadulterated pleasure of watching a petty tyrant get what she deserves. Consider it a retirement gift from the firm. His words were a strange comfort. They were a reminder that while I may have been physically isolated in my new neighborhood, I was not alone. The skills and connections I had built over a decade were still there, dormant but ready. I saved the screenshots of the Facebook posts, converted them to PDFs, and added them to my digital evidence folder, just as Ben had advised. Brenda thought she was winning hearts and minds in her little online kingdom. But in the world I came from, a world of evidence and law, she was methodically confessing her crimes in a public forum. Brenda Miller's next move demonstrated a dangerous escalation in her obsession. Having failed to intimidate me with bylaws, property damage, and social ostracism, she decided to bring in a higher power. She began a systematic campaign of weaponizing city and municipal authorities, using them as her own private enforcement arm to harass me. The first salvo came in the form of a white van from the city's code enforcement department. I was weeding what was left of my garden when a man in a crisp uniform with a prominent city insignia on the sleeve walked up my driveway. He carried, of course, a clipboard. Clara Hayes, he asked, his tone weary, as if he already knew this was a waste of his time. That's me, I said, standing up and brushing the dirt from my jeans. We've received an anonymous complaint about an unpermitted structure on this property, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the back of my house. A dilapidated shed that is not up to code and constitutes a public nuisance. He was talking about the old potting shed. It was a small, charming structure, original to the property, that I had just spent a weekend repairing and repainting. It was as dilapidated as a brand new car. Officer, I said, keeping my voice even and respectful. The shed you're referring to has been on this property since at least the 1940s. It predates the city's current permitting ordinances by several decades and is therefore grandfathered in. If you'll give me one moment, I can provide you with the historical property records and a copy of the city ordinance for your review. I went inside and returned with another folder, this one labeled Property Records. I had anticipated this exact tactic. In my due diligence before buying the house, I had pulled every available document from the city archives. The code enforcement officer looked surprised by my preparedness. He reviewed the documents, a series of dated photographs and tax records that clearly showed the shed's existence long before the relevant codes were written. He sighed, handing the folder back to me. Everything seems to be in order here. Ma'am, Sorry to have bothered you. We have to follow up on every complaint. I understand completely, I said. Just for the record, this is the fourth distinct type of harassment I've received from a neighbor in the past month. I trust you'll note in your report that this complaint was unfounded. He nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He knew exactly what was going on. He made a note on his clipboard and left. 2 weeks later, the second official visit occurred. This time, it was from the county planning department. A stern-faced woman arrived to investigate a formal complaint filed by the Crestwood HOA regarding a boundary dispute. The complaint alleged that the fence at the back of my property encroached on HOA common land by approximately 5 feet. It was a more serious accusation, a direct challenge to the legal boundaries of my property. Again, I was prepared. I'm glad you're here. I told the planner. There seems to be a great deal of confusion on the part of my neighbors. Let me get the official survey map. I produced the certified survey I had commissioned before my purchase. It was a large, detailed document, professionally drafted, showing the precise metes and bounds of my land. It clearly showed that my property, Parcel 7B, was a distinct and separate entity from the land that comprised the Crestwood subdivision. The fence, in fact, was located a full 2 feet inside my own property line. The planner examined my survey and then consulted her own official county maps on her tablet. Well, she said after a few minutes of cross-referencing, your survey is consistent with the county's records. According to this, there is no encroachment. The fence is well within your property line. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of apology and annoyance. This complaint seems to be entirely without merit. That is my assessment as well, I replied calmly. After she left, I made a phone call. The next morning, a professional surveyor arrived. For several hours, he worked, using his transit and GPS equipment. By the time he was done, the legal boundaries of my property were no longer invisible lines on a map. They were marked by a series of sturdy wooden stakes topped with bright, unmissable fluorescent orange flags. The message was clear and visible to everyone. This is my land. Do not cross. The bright orange flags seemed to enrage Brenda more than anything else had. They were a physical, undeniable refutation of her claims. Her campaign of using official channels had failed spectacularly, exposing her complaints as baseless and malicious. This public failure, I suspect, pushed her over the edge from calculated harasser to desperate aggressor. She needed to reassert her power, and she chose a threat designed to strike at the heart of any homeowner's security, the ownership of their home itself. The final escalation arrived via a courier. It was a thick, heavy envelope from a law firm I recognized as one of the most aggressive and unscrupulous in the region. Inside was a formal-looking letter, dense with legal jargon. It was a notice of intent to file lien. My blood ran cold as I read it. The letter, sent on behalf of the Crestwood HOA, claimed that I was delinquent in the amount of $4,750. This figure, they alleged, was composed of months of unpaid dues, which I didn't owe. The accumulated fines for my door, garden, and wind chime, plus thousands of dollars in attorney's fees that Brenda had supposedly incurred in her attempts to bring me into compliance. The letter stated that if the full amount was not paid within 15 days, the Crestwood Homeowners Association would place a lien on my property. This was no longer a petty squabble. A lien is a legal claim against a property. It could prevent me from selling or refinancing my house. It could, in a worst-case scenario, even lead to foreclosure proceedings. It was a direct, serious, and potentially catastrophic threat to my financial well-being and my ownership of my home. The letter was pure legal intimidation, designed to terrorize an average homeowner into immediate capitulation. But I was not an average homeowner. I was a lawyer who had spent over a decade dissecting and dismantling letters exactly like this one. I recognized it for what it was: a fraudulent, unenforceable threat. Placing a lien on a property to which you have no legal claim is a serious offense. It's called slander of title, and it carries severe penalties. I sat at my desk, the threatening letter in my hand, and a profound sense of calm washed over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This was the final piece of evidence. This was the act that took Brenda's campaign from mere harassment to attempted fraud and extortion. She had finally, after months of dancing around the edges, committed a fatal, irredeemable error. I picked up the phone and dialed my old partner, Ben Carter. "Ben," I said, my voice steady and firm. "It's Clara. Get the paperwork ready. We're filing." The final confrontation was orchestrated by Brenda herself, a public spectacle designed to be her ultimate triumph and my ultimate humiliation. Emboldened by the threatening letter from her lawyers and my subsequent silence, which she had clearly misinterpreted as fear, she decided it was time for direct action. She announced her plan in the Crestwood Neighbors Facebook group. Community Action Alert. The post began, dripping with self-importance. This Saturday, at 10:00 a.m., the HOA, with the help of our community landscaping contractor, will be performing a boundary reclamation at the property line of 1512 Old Farm Road. We will be removing the improperly placed survey stakes and reclaiming the strip of common area land that has been unlawfully claimed. All residents are encouraged to attend to show support for our community and our rules. She was planning to come onto my property, with an audience, and physically tear out my survey markers. It was an act of trespass, vandalism, and public intimidation all rolled into one. It was also the most perfect, beautifully wrapped gift she could have possibly given me. On Saturday morning, I was ready. I didn't wait for them on the porch. Instead, I stood at the edge of my lawn, right next to the first fluorescent orange survey stake that marked the corner of my property. I had a portable folding chair, a small table, and a large thermos of coffee. I also had a folder, thick with documents, resting on the table. My security cameras, of course, were recording everything. At precisely 10:00 a.m., the procession began. Brenda arrived in her golf cart, leading a large flatbed truck from a landscaping company. Behind her, a small crowd of about 20 neighbors followed, a mix of her loyal supporters and the morbidly curious. Brenda dismounted her golf cart like a general taking the field. She strode confidently toward me, her face a mask of smug victory. Two burly landscapers carrying shovels and crowbars flanked her. "Well, Miss Hayes," she said loudly, playing to the crowd, "your time is up. I gave you a chance to resolve this peacefully, but you chose defiance. Today, we are restoring the proper boundaries of Crestwood Estates." I took a slow sip of my coffee and looked at her, my expression calm. "Brenda, for the last time, you need to leave my property. You and your contractors are trespassing." She let out a short, sharp laugh. "Your property. This is HOA common land. And these," she kicked at the base of the survey stake, "are fraudulent. We have a lien against your house for a reason. You have no rights here." "That's where you're wrong," I said softly. I stood up. "You have no lien. Your claim is fraudulent, and every step you take past that stake is a criminal act. I have warned you, repeatedly and in writing. You are leaving me no choice. Choice. Oh, you have no choices left, she sneered. She turned to the landscapers. Get rid of this stake, and then tear out that ridiculous vegetable garden. As the landscapers took a step forward, Brenda's phone began to ring. She glanced at it, annoyed. Then her eyes widened slightly. She answered it. Hello. Yes. This is she. What her face began to pale. I knew who was calling. My lawyer, Ben, had filed our lawsuit electronically at 9:00 a.m. that morning. The court had just issued the summons. Brenda was being notified that she, personally, along with the HOA, was being sued in federal court for harassment, slander of title, and attempted extortion. While she was stammering into the phone, I made my own move. Brenda, I said, my voice cutting through her panicked conversation. Since you seem to enjoy involving the authorities, I thought I'd do the same. Just then, a city police car turned onto the street, its lights silently flashing. It pulled up behind the landscaping truck. Brenda's jaw dropped. She hung up the phone. You called the cops on me, she shrieked, her voice cracking. I'm the victim here. She is trespassing on HOA land. The officer, a tall, professional-looking man, walked toward us. Ma'am, I'm Officer Davis. We received a call about a disturbance. Brenda immediately launched into her performance. Thank goodness you're here. Officer, this woman, she pointed a trembling finger at me, is an outsider who refuses to follow the rules. This is our community property, and she is trying to claim it. I am the HOA president, and I am trying to restore order. Officer Davis turned to me, his expression neutral. Ma'am, what is your side of the story? This was the moment, the grand reversal. Officer, I began, my voice clear and unwavering. This is very simple. This woman, Brenda Miller, is leading a group of people who are actively trespassing on my private property with the stated intent to commit vandalism. Brenda exploded. It is not her property. This is Crestwood Estates. I am the president. I'm not in the wrong here. I held up my hand. You're right about one thing. Brenda, this is Crestwood Estates. I turned back to the officer. And I am not in the Crestwood HOA. A confused silence fell over the crowd. Brenda just stared at me, her mouth hanging open. I picked up the folder from my table and handed it to the officer. In this folder, you will find the original deed to my property, 1512 Old Farm Road, also known as Parcel 7B. You will also find the official, recorded county plat map for the Crestwood Estates subdivision. If you look closely, you'll see that the subdivision was built entirely around my parcel. My property is, and always has been, a separate legal entity. It is not, nor has it ever been, part of the HOA. The folder also contains a copy of my title insurance policy, which explicitly states that the property is free of any and all HOA encumbrances. Officer Davis took the folder and began to review the documents. His eyebrows shot up as he looked at the plat map, a clear visual representation of my island in their sea of beige. I continued, my voice gaining strength as I addressed the stunned crowd. For 3 months, this woman has been engaged in a systematic and malicious campaign of harassment against me. It started with fraudulent fines, which I have documented. It escalated to property damage, the poisoning of my garden, which I have on video. It included a public smear campaign on social media, copies of which are in that folder. And it culminated in her hiring a law firm to send me a fraudulent threat of a lien against my home, which constitutes attempted extortion. I pointed to my security camera, a silent black dome under the eave of my porch. Every moment of this confrontation, including your criminal trespassing and your stated intent to vandalize my property, has been recorded in high-definition video and audio. The officer looked up from the plat map, his face now a hard mask of professionalism. He looked at Brenda, who seemed to have shrunk. The color had drained from her face, and for the first time, the mask of smug superiority was gone, replaced by the dawning horror of utter defeat. He handed the folder back to me. "Ma'am, your documentation is perfectly clear." He then turned to Brenda, and his voice was cold steel. "Brenda Miller, you and your employees are on private property. You have been asked to leave. If you do not vacate the premises immediately, you will all be arrested for criminal trespass." Brenda stood there, speechless and utterly broken, as the foundation of her power, her entire world, crumbled to dust at her feet in front of the very people she had ruled over. The aftermath was a legal and social firestorm that consumed Brenda Miller and fundamentally reshaped Crestwood Estates. My lawsuit, filed by Ben's formidable litigation team, was an open and shut case. The evidence was overwhelming, the chain of certified letters proving she knowingly acted without jurisdiction. The high-definition video of her contractors poisoning my garden, the notarized screenshots of the slanderous Facebook posts, the fraudulent lien threat from her lawyers, and finally, the video of the climactic confrontation, complete with her confession of intent to vandalize my property in front of a police officer. Brenda's homeowner's insurance took one look at the case and denied her coverage, citing the intentional acts exclusion in her policy. The HOA's own insurance fought for a while before realizing the board had acted with gross negligence under Brenda's leadership and began looking for the quickest, cheapest way out. Brenda was left personally liable, facing a judgment that would have bankrupted her. This is where the title of my story finds its resolution. We went to mediation. Brenda, facing financial ruin, was desperate. I had no desire to destroy her life completely. I wanted justice, and I wanted a guarantee of future peace. So, I offered her a unique settlement, one that would serve as a constant, humiliating reminder of her defeat. I had discovered during the legal discovery process that Brenda's primary source of income was a rental property she owned a few towns over. The rent she collected was a little over $2,000 a month. My offer of settlement was this: the lawsuit would be dropped in exchange for a structured payment plan. She would have to pay me, personally, a monthly sum for the next 10 years. The amount $6,000 a month, almost exactly 3 times the rent she collected. She was forced to accept. So now, every month, Brenda Miller collects rent from her tenants. And then she has to write a personal check to me for 3 times that amount. She is, in a very real sense, paying my living expenses. She has become the source of the very peace and financial security she tried so desperately to take from me. Socially, she was finished. News of the lawsuit and the damning evidence spread through the community like wildfire. She was removed as HOA president in a unanimous vote of no confidence at an emergency meeting. She was too ashamed to attend. She became a pariah. Within 6 months, a for sale sign appeared on her perfectly manicured lawn. The HOA, under new, reasonable leadership, sent me a formal letter of apology and a basket of local artisanal goods. Their first official act was to formally recognize the unique status of my property and to amend the community map to clearly show where their jurisdiction ended. The war was over. My life is quiet now. My sunflower yellow door remains a cheerful beacon on the street. My vegetable garden is thriving. The neighbors, free from Brenda's tyrannical reign, are friendly and welcoming. I spend my days baking, reading, and enjoying the scent of old wood and lavender. And once a month, like clockwork, a check arrives in the mail. It is my quiet, satisfying, and legally binding trophy, a reminder that sometimes the best revenge is simply to live peacefully and well on the foundations of your enemy's defeat.